We're now on the top of Daf of Dalid Omid Beis, and the Gemara is darshaning this pasuk in Parshas Korach that we started with, and the Gemara says the following: Ulemi Beis la paroches ba'avadetem. In other words, what the Gemara is saying here to defend Levi is that if we look carefully at the pasuk, we'll see that it says "Ulimi beis la paroches va'avadetem," and only afterwards does it say "avodas matana." And what we're going to say now, according to Levi, is something amazing. That "Ulimi beis la paroches," which is referring to the paroches of the Kodesh Kodashim, there the Torah says avodas matana, that you're only chayav for avodas matana in the Kodesh Kodashim, as opposed to the exclusion of an avodas siluk. So let's take, for example, you remember that on Yoma Kippurim, the Kohen Gadol goes into the Kodesh Kodashim twice. On the second round, he takes out the kaf umachta. That's an avodas siluk. And the Torah here, by adding avodas matana, as opposed to the exclusion of avodas siluk, is referring to lemi beis la paroches, to that avoda that's done bifnim, which would be the first time the Kohen Gadol goes in to be maktir the Ketores. If a non-Kohen would do so, he'd be chayav misa b'dei shamayim. But the second time the Kohen Gadol goes in l'fnai v'lifnim to remove the Ketores, whatever was left over in the kaf and the machta, that would not generate a chayav misa b'dei shamayim in the case of a zar, because that's called an avodas siluk and not an avodas matana. But as far as an avoda bachutz in the Azara is concerned, there's no stipulation of avodas matana, and therefore even an avodas chutz like trumas hadeshin would generate a chiyuv misa v'dei shamayim. Elmi beis la parochas hu avodas matana below avodas siluk bachutz. When we're talking about the mizbech hachitzon in the Azara, filu avodas siluk, you'll be chayav, and you drop the requirement of avodas matana, and even avodas siluk will be chayav, and hence there will be a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim in the case of truma sadesh. So Gemara says, if that be the case, wait a second. Let's look at the pasuk another time. We keep going back to the Chumash. It says, "Uli beis la paroches va'avadetem," and then avodas matana. Avadetem means avoda tama. What then is the basis for excluding? Let's take, for example, Kabbalas Adam or Holachas Adam from the Chiyuv Misa B'dei Shemaim of a Zar. You're going to tell me avadetem means avoda tama. These don't qualify as complete avodas because they're only preliminary avodas, which can culminate with zrika. But it's outside the beis haparoches. And according to you, the Torah, by adding beis haparoches, is stipulating these conditions in the Kodesh Kodashim, but outside in the Mizbeach Chitzon, we don't have these conditions. A zar should be chayav misa for any avoda, even Kabbalas Adam. Ihochi v'avadetem nami el mi beis haparoches hu d'avoda tama v'lo avoda sheyesh lachre avoda ha bachutz afil avoda sheyesh lachre avoda. Hence, there should be a chiyuv misa b'dei shamayim incurred even in the case of Kabbalas Adam or Halachas Adam. We don't need an avoda tama outside of the Kodesh Kodashim, according to your understanding, Levi, of the pasuk. And the Gemara answers, the avadetem hadar arve kro. We have to go back to the pasuk, and in this case, we're going to focus our attention on one letter in the pasuk. It says the avadetem, and the vav that's added here to avadetem is coming to indicate that we should take the word vavadatem and hadar arve kra, and we link it back to that which we had earlier, which was lechol dvar hamizbeach. And lechol dvar mizbeach are avodos that are performed on the mizbeach, and the mizbeach here is the mizbeach achitzon out in the azor. Now, the basic conclusion of this whole presentation of Levi is that a zar is chayav misa bidei shamayim for an avoda siluk if it is related to the mizbeach in the azara, but if he does an avoda siluk inside the Kodesh Kadoshim, then he's not chayav. Boy, Rav wants to know, avoda siluk behechal ma. Where do you classify the hechal? The hechal is sort of a bein hashmashal situation. It's not exactly bachutz, but it's certainly not bifnim. Lifnim edaminale, shall we assume that that's called pnim, and therefore, if it has the status of pnim, then even Levi would agree that in the case of an avodah siluk, you would be the kohen, the non-kohen would be patur. Or chutz medaminale, shall we classify it and subsume it as avodah chutz, according to which Levi says that even an avodah siluk generates a chiyuv mitzvah b'dei shamayim, like the case of haromas hadeshem. Hadar pashte, and then Rav himself answered his own question. It says mi base ula mi base. Once again, we go back to the pasuk, and the pasuk says ula mi base. It could have said li base. What's ula mi base instead of mi base? And it means ula mi base to tell you that ulami base, it's a ribui ulami base. Even the hechal is called ulami base haparochas. So if it were to say base haparochas, that would be referring exclusively to the Kodesh Kadoshim, to the exclusion of the hechal. But ulami base is coming to expand the status of the Kodesh Kadoshim to include even the hechal. Okay. Now, according to Rava, that just vacillated about the hechal in a case of an avodah siluk, apparently, had it been an avodas matana in the hechal, he would certainly be chayav. Let's take a look at what goes on in the hechal. So, for example, on the shulchan, we have the lechem hapanim. What would be, according to Rava's understanding, that as far as an avoda of what? Avodas matana, a zar is chayav misa, even in the hechal. It's only an avodah siluk that he vacillated about. Now a zar puts the lechem hapanim on top of the shulchan in the hechal. Gemara says no. We have another condition that applies even bachutz in order for the non-kohen to be chayav misa, and that is that it has to be an avodah tama. Forget about avodas matana. Okay, let's say that putting the lechem on the shulchan is avodas matana, but it's not an avodah tama. The ikar siddur bazichin. We have bazichin, which are these ladles that they use to place the levona on the shulchan, and it's not enough to set up the lechem hapanim on the shulchan, but subsequently you need to bring the levona onto the shulchan. That's called siddur habazichin. Gemara says no. Even in the case of siddur habazichin, the zar is not going to be chayav misa because it still is not an avodah tama. What comes after the siddur of the Levona is siluk vehaktorah. Now we have to take the lechem apodim and the Levona, remove it from the shulchan, and do the haktorah of the Levona on the Mizbeach. Now, it seems to me, although I couldn't find anyone who spells this out, that if the Zar were to do the haktoras halavona on the Mizbeach, then he'd be chayav mitzvah b'nei shemaim. Again, I can't find anyone who says it because it's so simple, nobody even bothered spelling it out, I think. It certainly is an avoda tama because after you burn the levona on the Mizbeach, probably, I would add the following. This is included in the list of 4 of Rabbi Yochanan. Let's go back to, let's go back to Rav, Arba Avodas, right? And one of them is called Haktorah. Oh, Saktorah certainly includes Haktorah the Levon. Zarsha Sidus HaMenorah L'chayv. According to this logic of Rava, that a Zar is Chayv Misa for an Avoda in the Heichal, then why not assume that lighting the menorah, like putting the lechem aponim that we discussed before on the shulchan, is also an avoda. After all, the Torah says ba'loschas haneros, addressing the kohanim, and now the Zar usurped the hadlok of the menorah. He should be chayav misa. Gemara says ikanasina nesinas psila. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. We're not yet up to lighting the menorah. I jumped a few steps, sorry. First, we're talking about Zar Shesider es HaMenorah. Right? There's a mitzvah on the Kohen to organize the menorah. And now the non-Kohen should be chayav misa, even though it's an avoda inside the Heichal. So this has to do with Hatovas HaMenorah. And the Gemara thinks that Hatovas HaMenorah, as far as the chefta of the menorah is concerned, is an avoda tamas. The Gemara answers no. We're not talking about the chefta of the menorah. We're talking about hadlaka. So we have a long process that begins with hatova until it culminates in the hadlaka. Ikanasinas psila. He's got to put the wicks in. Nasan psila l'chayev. Ikanasinas shemen. Even after the psila, there's another avoda. You have to put the oil in. Nasan shemen l'chayev ikadlaka. And even placing the oil in the menorah is still not an avodah tama because we need subsequent to that hadlaka. Okay, so what's the deal if a zar is madlik the ner she b'menorah in the heichal? According to you, Rava, that's an avodah tama. It should be chayav misa. Where it says hadlaka lav avodah. Hadlaka does not have the status of an avodah. The way I understand this is that even though, and this is the Ravid's opinion, even though you require a Kohen to be madlik the neros, but that's not an avodah. And that means that there are 2 categories in terms of kahuna. There's an avodah category, and then there's a mitzvahs kahuna. The Torah commands the Kohen ba'loschas haneros. Kohen is commanded in a mitzvah of hadlaka, but it's not an avodah. It is a chovas gavra that's incumbent upon the Kohen. If the non-Kohen usurps this, we'll give him patch. He has stolen a mitzvah, let him pay asar zuv and kesef to the Kohen, but he's not chayav mitzvah b'nei shemayim because he's not usurping an avodah. The Rambam goes a step further. The Rambam thinks that when the Gemara says that adlokas haneros is not a menorah, is not an avodah, we don't even need a Kohen. The only problem is a non-Kohen is not allowed to entry into the heichal. So how would you have a case where the zar would be allowed to be madlik the ner shebemikdash if he can't enter into the menorah which is located in the heichal? The Rambam says that the Kohen took the menorah, removed it from the heichal. The zar lit the menorah outside of the heichal. The Kohen replaces that lit menorah back into the heichal, and then we yotze the mitzvah. Because hadlaka is not an avodah. That's the shita surah. Gemara asks for lo. is it really so that hadlaka is not an avoda? For Asanya, we have a brisa that says, and now we're going to analyze a pasuk at the very beginning of Sefer Vayikra. It says, "V'nosnu b'nei Aaron hakohen eish al hamizbeach, v'archu eitzim al ha'eish." And apparently the pasuk is verbose, and the brisa is going to derive from this pasuk limed al hatzotzas alisa. Now, what happens is that we have to keep the Eish on the Mizbeach going 24/7. When it starts dying down, then we take the cavalry, the backup, and that is small chips of wood. And that's called hatzotzas, meaning lighting up. Elisa. Elisa are these kindling chips. And these were used on a daily basis to light up the menorah. To light up the H on the Maruch on the Mizbeach. Shalote Elabet Kohen, kosher. And you see clearly that we need a Kohen kosher and ubikli shares. And we also need kli shares. In other words, we're not talking about a zar over here because only a Kohen can wear big day kahuna. And if you require big day kahuna for the hatzotzas halisa, then it must be that it's an avoda. So the Gemara says hatzotzas halisa avoda hi hadlaka lav avoda. The kindling of these chips of wood is called an avoda. That is setting up the eish on the mizbeach. That is an active, full-fledged burning. But hadlaka means that you just take an eish, you bring it towards the psila, and then the psila goes up on its own meileh. That's not called an avoda. Now the Gemara wants to know the following. If you're telling me that a zar is chayiv misa v'dei shamayim for an avoda tama, concluding a service in the Beis Hamikdash, elamiyata zeshesider samarocha lichayev. What about the person who organizes the fire on the mizbeach? Now, the Gemara thinks that as far as Mizbeach is concerned, this is a concluding avoda. And the Gemara answers, Ika Sider Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. It's not enough to start burning the logs of wood on the Maruch on the Mizbeach, but you need in addition Shnei Gizrei Eitzim. Now to add two, it's after they filled up the Maruch with wood, they have to add 2 blocks of wood. And we have long discussions about the size and the minimum shear and so forth and so on. But that would be the concluding avoda of organizing the maruch on the mizbeach. The Gemara says Seder Shnei Gizrei. So if a zar does the Seder Gizrei Eitzim, then he has completed the process of preparing the mizbeach. The Gemara says no. Preparing the mizbeach is not an avoda tama. We need the Haktorah on the Mizbeach. Ika Sider Evarin. We've got to take the limbs of the carbon and put them on the fire. That's when the Avodah concludes. Rabbi Yochanan does commit himself to the position that if the non-Kohen will place the Shnei Gizrei Eitzim on the Mizbech, he's chayav. Gemara says, you're right. We have a machlok. Mar Sarvar Avoda Tamahi. Rabbi Yochanan holds that setting up the fire on the Mizbeach, vis-a-vis the Mizbeach, that's an Avoda Tama. Umar Sarvar, but Rav is of the opinion, Lav Avoda Tamahi, we need the Haktorah of the carbon, in this case the Emurim and the Evarim on the Mizbeach. That's the conclusive Avoda. Tanya Kavose, the Rav, Tanya Kavose, the Levi. We're going back to the question of Trumas Hadeshen in the case of Azar. Tanya Kavose Dira. Avoda Shazar Chayav Aleim Misa. What's included in the avodas that generate a Chayav Misa in the case of Azar? Zrikas Dam. Okay, Zrikas Dam clearly has all the conditions necessary for a Chayav Misa. bein bifnim, bein lifnai v'lifnim, even inside the Kodesh Kadosh, as we saw based on the pasuk of the base la paroches. Next, hamaze bechatas ha'of, v'amematze v'amaktir bi'olas ha'of. Okay, here we have to know a little bit more about what's called a chatas ha'of and an olas ha'of. In the case of a chatas ha'of, there's an entire parsha in Vayikra Hey about the hazah of the dam on what's called the kir hamizbeach, the outer part, the side of the mizbeach. Then we have something called an olas ha'of, and there, what we require is what's called mimatzah or mitzui. We take the oaf after the malika and we push it against the kir hamizbeach, and in that way we squeeze out the dam, and that is also a parsha in Vayikra, Perek Aleph. And in all these cases, if a non-Kohen would do this avodah, he's chayav misa. In the case of olas ha'of, there's going to be a haktorah, and Hamanaseh shlosha lugim mayim. This is again referring to Chag HaSukkos, shlosha lugim yayin, and that's referring to the niskei yayin of the korban shlom, the korban ola. But what's profoundly missing from the list? No mention of Trumas Halishka. But Tanya Kavase the Levi avodah shezar chayv aleim misa hamerim es hadeshen. Can't be anything more explicit than that. And in fact, Levi himself had quoted either this brisa or a similar brisa that Trumas Hadeshen is a full-fledged avoda, even though it's siluk, but based on lechol davar that we were marbin, a zaris chayv misa v'dei sheva zos b'fnim. We discussed the case of the zos in the heichal for echatas pnimis and sheba mitzorah. We spoke about the azos of the lug shemen of the mitzorah, and hamayla al gabi mizbeach bein davar kosher bein davar posel. Anyone who burns part of the sacrifice on the mizbeach, whether or not it is kosher or it's posel. Now here we have to know more about a concept called ein moridin, which means that sometimes if you have a carbon that's possible, let's say it became tamei, but once it's on the mizbeach, we don't take it down. Perhaps we shouldn't be putting it up on the mizbeach from the get-go, but we don't take it down. So those are sugyas in Masechet Zvachim. But be that as it may, if the non-Kohen does such a thing, even in the case of a davar posel, he places it on the mizbeach for burning purposes, then he's chayav misa b'dei shamai. Gemara asks the following naive question: Lama mefisim? Why do we do a pious? Gemara says, Lama mefisim. What kind of a question is that? Get amora. I mean, we said it was very dangerous, with the competition. All the kohanim are vying for the zchus of bringing the of being mayor in the deshem. Ella, we have to reformulate the question: Lama mefisim v'chodrim u'mefisim. Why do we have to constantly do this pious 4 times each day? Wouldn't it have been sufficient to, on one particular moment, do the pious for all the avodas that are up for grabs? And it seems ridiculous that 4 times a day they had to do this hagrola. And Rabbi Yochanan quotes the pasuk, "K'dei lahargish kol hazora shenemar asher yachtov namtik sod bebeis Elokeinu nahalech be-rugish." David HaMelech says that there's got to be rugish. There's got to be like excitement bebeis Hashem. And Rabbi Yochanan says that from this pasuk we derive the conclusion that we want to do a pious after a pious after a pious during the entire day. This brings a lot of excitement into the Azorah, into the Beis HaMikdash. But memefaisim, what should the Kohanim be wearing who are vying in this lottery for the avodah? Rav Nachman Omar, big day chol. That's intuitively logical. It's not yet, we're not yet ready for the avodah. You didn't even win the lottery. Rav Sheshis Omar, big day kodesh. For some strange reason, Rav Sheshis wants the Kohanim to be wearing big day kodesh for the pious. And the Gemara analyzes. Rav Nachman Omar, big day chol. The Iyamrit, the big day kodesh. If you want to tell the Kohanim to dress up in their garments, in their big day kahuna, with all the regalia for the pious, then you're running a dangerous operation. Why? Ika balizos de chamse viavde. Chamas. Chamas means when I desire to take something by force, like for example, a chamson will put money in front of you and take your object, even though you're not willing to sell it. So he's not such a bad gaslam because he's paying for the object, but he steals it in effect. That's a chamson because you never agreed to sell it to. Now, what we're afraid of is in this whole hullabaloo, so to speak, of pious, if one Kohen is very aggressive, he's called Balei Ros, and he doesn't want to lose this lottery, so he's already going to jump up and do the avodah. He's absolutely prepared to do the avodah. So before you blink and the Mamuna gets to call out the one who was Zocha, he already took over the avodah, this guy, this ruffian, this aggressive Kohen who's called the Balei Ros. So therefore, it's dangerous, says Rav Nachman, or you're exposing yourself to this vulnerability if you already have the Kohanim dressed up in the big day kahuna at the time of the pies. Rav Sheshis of the big day kodesh, the Yom big day chol, agav chavivusa mikru viavdi. Imagine when the Kohen is elected, he wins the lottery. He's so overwhelmed by the joy that he got it. He runs up to do the avodah and to take out the deshen. And guess what? He's wearing big day chol, and a Kohen who does an avodah wearing big day chol is chayav misa, and the avodah is psula. Amar Rav Nachman Minale, what's my source that the Kohen should be wearing big day chol at the time of the pious? This nan we have Mishnah Masechet Tamid Masrun lechazonim, meaning following the whole hagrola, the entire pious. Then the Kohanim are given over to chazonim. These are the attendants. And hayumafshitin osam es bigdehem. Whatever big day chol they were wearing, they took off those big day chol. Lo yemenicham aleim el michnasayim bilvad. All they had on them was michnasayim. Again, all big day chol. And then they would put on them the big day kodesh. It would turn to Daf Chafei Amud Aleph. My la bi osan shezach lepayis. And this Brisa is actually a Mishnah, I should say, in Talmud, is addressing that person who is Zoche. He had the winning lottery ticket, and we put on him the big day Kodesh. Amar Rav Huna, Bar Yehuda, Amar Rav Sheshes, Lo biosan shelo zoch lepayis. We're not talking about those who won the pious, but rather those who did not win the pious. And if you didn't win the pious, then you have to remove your garments because you were wearing big day kodesh, ready and eager to go in and do the avodah. Hopefully, you have the winning betting number, but you lost. So take off your big day kodesh. If your interpretation of Nachman is correct, that the Mishnah is addressing those who won the pious, what does that mean? That they let them keep on their michnasayim, which are big day chol according to your interpretation of Nachman. But Tanya, we have a brisa minayin shaliyeh davar akodem lemichnasayim, that when you put on the michnasayim of the big day kuna, there's nothing on your body. It's got to be the first thing that touches your flesh. And how do we know this? Talmud Lomer michnasay bad yeh al bisaro. Gemara says the idach. What would be the defense of Rav Nachman? This is how we have to interpret the Mishnah. Ad she'odam aleim bigdei chol. They're still wearing the bigdei chol. Malbishin osam bigdei kodesh. Then the attendants have to put on the bigdei kodesh for them after they won the payis, and they'll have to remove, of course, their bigdei chol, put on the bigdei kodesh. V'hayu mafshitin osan bigdei chol. They remove all the bigdei chol. V'lo yemenichim ela michnasayim bilvad. They were allowed to just wear their michnasayim, and then they dress in the other bigdei kodesh. In other words, they would put on the michnasayim first, and then they were malbish them. They made them wear the rest of the begodim. So it means that for sure the michnasayim have to be put on first, but it's inappropriate for the kohen to stand there naked in order to satisfy this requirement. Therefore, they don't disrobe him completely and then put on his bigdei kodesh, don the bigdei kodesh. Rather, they change their breeches while still wearing their michnasayim of bigdei chol, and then they change their outer garments and put on bigdei kodesh. And now we're up to Omar of Sheshes, and he's going to bring a proof from a brisa to his shita against the shita of Nachman that at the time of the payis, the kohanim should be lined up for the lottery wearing bigdei kodesh. This is where we'll end here on Daf Chafei. Continuing tomorrow.